identified. This is number 2, and this is...
It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk.
Welcome to Seasoned Citizen Present. I'm Bob Carl, and today we have Leroy Waters, who is a native of Muscatine and a wood carver in his, what should I say, in your retirement years?
Right,
Okay.
right. I'm not that old, but you can say that.
All right. Leroy has been doing wood carving for some time, and we'll get into that subject. And on the table here we have a few examples of some of his work. And as you might know from the title of the subject, wood carving is for the birds. His specialty is carving birds. And I think the first question that I would like to address to Leroy is, how did you get started with this hobby of yours?
Well, the actual part of carving birds, I got started when we lived in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I did carving or whittling, as you might call it, for a number of years, and I've always been interested in it. When we lived in Winston-Salem, I went to a craft show which they had down there, and there was a lady from Chattanooga, Tennessee that had carved birds, and she was selling them for $185 a pair. And it wasn't the idea of selling them. She had them all sold. She was taking orders. And I decided if she could do it, I could do it. So I've been carving birds for 15 to 17 years, something like that. And I have a few here today, but it seems like my boy ends up with most of them that I do, or my daughter and son do.
Yeah, right. You mentioned whittling, and I thought maybe you'd like to explain to us the difference between whittling and wood carving, or I see the term wood sculpting.
Well, wood sculpting basically would be carving or carving in a round. Now, carving in a round is where you carve completely around a subject.
I see.
But whittling, the way I understand whittling, you used a pocket knife and you went like that. Where the knife went, it didn't make any difference.
Yeah.
But the knives which I use and which I prefer to use are X-Acto knives. And the classes which I conduct, one thing I try to teach the students is to control that knife, because an X-Acto knife blade is just like a razor, and they cut just about as deep as a razor. So therefore you cannot let that knife slip very often. About 3 times and then you quit carving. But that is the one thing that I do try to teach them, is how to handle the knife so that they are not cutting themselves, and so they control that blade at all times.
I see. I'm sure that the people who are watching this show would like to know whether this is an expensive hobby or not.
No, it's about as cheap a hobby as you could find.
I see.
This block of wood here is what I would make a parakeet out of. And I've read in books that you're supposed to be able to look at that block of wood and see the bird in it. Sometimes that's hard to do, but you can do it. But this block of wood, well, this came from a 4x6 which I purchased. But this block of wood would cost about $1.
I see.
One of the main knives which I use is a small X-Acto knife. And I think you can buy these I know you can buy these at Walmart or Jack's or some similar place for about $2 1/4.
I see.
And the knife and the block of wood is basically all you have to have, because my first birds I carved out of a square block of wood.
I see.
And for the painting of them, My wife does all the painting of the birds. I haven't tried that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And she uses watercolors. And the watercolors which she uses is a paint set that the kids use in school,
I see.
that you can buy for, what, I don't know, $1.50 or
Probably,
something like that.
probably, yeah.
And then they're sealed. After the watercolor is on there, you dilute varnish about half and half with a thinner just to seal the watercolor so that the paint don't run.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives them a little shiny finish.
I see.
But it's about as cheap a hobby as I think a person can find.
Mm-hmm.
And you can pass a lot of hours doing this,
Yes,
because there's a lot of hours involved in one of these birds.
one of the birds, yes. You mentioned what particular type of wood is that, Leroy?
This is basswood.
I see.
Basswood, in my estimation, is about the best wood that you can find
Mm-hmm.
for carving. It will split, but it does not split like fir or pine.
Uh-huh.
And basswood has a very high tensile strength, so that you can take the tail of a bird, even as thin as that is,
Mm-hmm.
sure, it can be broke, but really there's not much danger of breaking it,
Uh-huh.
because basswood has about the highest tensile strength of any wood there is. So there's a lot of different woods that you can carve out of. This bird here was made out of a piece of white pine.
I see.
White pine is wonderful, but it does split a little easier than basswood does.
Mhm.
But you can use cottonwood. I have some pieces of cottonwood which I use, and I have a duck there made out of walnut, which I don't recommend that because walnut is just a little too hard to cut.
Mm-hmm.
But basswood is about the best there is, even though it's hard to find. Some of the lumber yards will carry it,
I see.
but most of them carry it in a 7/8 inch or 1 inch thickness, which is not quite thick enough to make a bird out of.
Mm-hmm.
Beaches do have some 4x6s, but whether they're going to replace them or not,
Yeah.
I don't know. Now, the one place which you can go to buy basswood is at the wood shop in Bettendorf. It's on the other end of State Street,
Mm-hmm.
and they have pieces this size on up. But for one or two birds, a person can buy it at the wood shop up there.
Uh-huh. Then if they can't get it at a lumber yard, they probably can at a place that specializes in the other types, the non-construction type
Right,
lumber,
right.
things
But-
for hobbyists and craftsmen.
No,
No?
there's
Okay.
no place in Muscatine, outside of the lumber yard, there's no
Yeah.
place in Muscatine sells this,
Mm-hmm.
no place in Iowa City, no place in Davenport.
Okay.
There's
All
one
right.
shop in Bettendorf that
Yeah.
sells it.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, that's the only shop I know of that sells odd woods.
Uh-huh.
You can order them through Constantine Company, and there's various other companies that you can buy wood from.
Uh-huh.
But then you have to pay the shipping on them also.
Sure. Well, I wondered, if you selected your wood, someplace in a timber or anything, and cut it down and sawed it up into what I would consider dimension lumber, and then let it dry out in the backyard for 2 or 3 years before you worked the material.
I have some wood laying out in the barn that is that way,
Uh-huh.
that I've cut. Well, I've got some apple that I've cut, and I've got some cottonwood.
Mhm.
I don't know, I've read books. Of course, I've read a lot of books on carving and how to preserve wood and how to dry it. But there's various things they say you can do. You can take the end of a log and you can paint it. You can cover it with wax. You can cover it with tar. Let it lay for 2 or 3 years, and it'll be dry. But the luck that I have, every time I do that, the log splits clear in half. So, about the only wood that I select out of the timber is the purchase for the birds.
Uh-huh.
Now, I do spend a lot of time walking up through the timber, dead trees and so on like that, finding a piece of wood, like this one is particularly
Yes,
hard
that's,
to find.
yeah.
where you can set the bird here and still mount a nest down here. And you have, well, a lot of them will do it, but finding one particular that will fit is sometimes hard to do.
It's a little bit like looking for driftwood that you want for over your mantle or something like that. You
That's
have
very
to be
good.
at the right place at the right time.
That driftwood is a very good place to get it too.
I'll bet it is. I'll bet
At
it
least
is.
that way it's already clean.
Yes, that's true. This is an interesting piece, the robin, and I don't know whether whether they are able to pick this up
Yes.
on the camera, but these are the little birds with their mouths open, getting hopefully anticipating that they're going to get a part of that worm that the robin has in its mouth. This is a beautiful piece. I'm fascinated by it and all of the work
To
that
make
you've
the
done.
nest- To make the nest is a little bit worse than carving. I turned that on a lathe.
I see.
So, but a person can, do have one at home where I've just used a bird nest that I found to put the baby birds in.
Uh-huh.
Because they hold together pretty good.
I see. I hadn't even thought about that. That would certainly make it more natural looking if...
Well, true.
Yeah, yeah. Why don't you explain a little bit about the process, Leroy? You had a block of wood there that you showed us, and maybe you could kind of explain the process that you use.
I have quite a batch of them here at the moment.
Yeah. Can I help you hold some of them, or?
Yeah.
All right, I'll hold these, and then you tell me which ones you want.
Well, this normally is what you start out with. And like I say, the first birds which I carved, I started with a square block. There is a lot of cutting, though, to get it down to where you can cut it on a bird.
I presume that's the next step?
This is the next step, which I have a pattern, which I have made from pictures. I have this pattern, which is just cardboard patterns, made out of cornflake box.
Uh-huh.
You transfer it onto the block, and then I saw it with a bandsaw.
I see.
Now, like I say, everyone doesn't have access to a bandsaw.
Mm-hmm.
But with the bandsaw, you can cut the big hunks off of it, and you get it down to the rough shape of a bird. But the next one that I have here is one which I'm working on, which the tail is still blocked out. It isn't trimmed. In fact, the wings isn't trimmed down, or the head isn't shaped yet. But I'm working on it at the present time. This then is one that the shape has been completed on the bird, and after the body and the shape, the size that you want is made, then you can start cutting the feathers.
I see.
Now each feather is marked, cut, and cut out. After that, the next one then is to put all the veins into the feathers.
Uh-huh.
Now the veins which I put into the feathers is normally put in with a wood burner. It's, well, it does a nice job, and you could use any sharp instrument that you wanted to make the lines in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have the tail feather veined through the center, and then if you look at one that is completed here, then it is veined out to the sides
I see.
the way a normal bird feather is. And then, of course, they're separated down here, which is not necessary, but it's a little added touch to it.
Mm-hmm. This wood burning process, is that just a regular wood burner like you'd get at some hobby shop? Or
Yes.
I had one when I was a boy.
Oh.
I remember making some things out of...
When I first started out, the wood burner which I used was one that my kids had and had left laying around the house.
I see.
I since have progressed to a little better wood burner,
Yes.
but even this is not expensive.
Uh-huh.
That wood burner, I think, is $17.95, and it has interchangeable points.
I
hang
see.
onto it.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So that
I
you
see.
can put different points on. Like I have this one, then I have a needle point
Mm-hmm.
and some others. and you just slide the points back on there.
I see.
But this one gets much hotter than those that you had when you was a kid.
I see.
This, when you're doing it, if you slip, you can tell it real fast. It doesn't take long in your thumb to find out that it gets warm.
The smell of burning flesh, huh?
Right. But where I do my burning is I do it on, well, I brace my hands on my leg like this to burn them. But each line, each individual line on all of the feathers and completely over the bird is all made one at a time.
I see.
It does take a lot of hours to do it.
I was going to say, that's pretty time-consuming, I would imagine.
I would guess, although I've never kept track of the actual wood burning, I would guess that it takes me about 5 hours to burn all the feathers onto the bird.
I see.
You see this bird here, which I burnt the feathers, but I haven't burnt the head or the tail yet.
Yeah, I see.
And but to me, this is a good wood burner. You can go, the next better wood burner that you go to is about $110.
Oh, well, that'd be, yeah, that gets a little expensive then.
Of course, that's the same way with this. Now, this knife
This is
runs
the
about
knife.
2 1/4. But to go to the electric carvers, a good one will run you about $185 to $225. And unless you're in it commercially and can sell, or actually outselling birds, it isn't worth the effort. It is faster and it is easier.
I was going to say now, this looks like most of the blades that I've seen on the X-Acto knives in the store. Do you use other kind of blades, shaped blades, or?
Oh, yes. I basically have got down to 3 blades that I use,
Oh, I see.
which you can see
Oh,
there.
yes, yes. Uh-huh,
And it's mainly this one and this one.
I see.
This one's for harder, or starting carving, where you're cutting bigger pieces.
Bigger, yeah, you need a little more beef to it,
Right.
to the blade.
Right.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But
You talked about the number of hours that it takes. I would think that your wife might object if you're out working in the shop, but where do you do the carving?
most of my carving is done right here. Sitting watching TV, I put a dish towel over my lap, and I can sit and carve all evening and watch the TV.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I do all of my carving. I do
I
none
see.
whatsoever in the basement or otherwise. Of course, the cutting with a bandsaw,
Oh, sure,
yes.
sure. That's understandable.
And the
But that's not where the time is. The time is
No,
in this
time
part.
is here.
Yes.
And the feathering of the birds, I do at the kitchen table.
Mm-hmm.
But I still do them on my legs.
Uh-huh.
I mean, to brace my hands
Sure.
so that I can control that knife blade just a little better.
Uh-huh.
And if I say this, I know tonight what I'll do. If I say that I very seldom cut my fingers, tonight I will.
Yeah.
Because last year, I was laid up all year and I did no carving. Well, it wasn't last year, it was the year before. I did no carving whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
Well, then, beginning of last year, I had a carving class coming up, so I thought I'd better try it a little bit. I cut 3 fingers that first night. If you're used to it, you don't.
Yeah.
It's when you...
Yeah. When you stop for a while, you get out of
Right.
practice.
That's right.
I guess it's much like any other skill that you develop over time. You need to work at it to keep up with it.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
I think the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Oh, yes, I'm sure
And you
that's
do
true.
it easier.
Yes.
Like some of my students, which they all don't appreciate the way I try to teach them to cut,
Uh-huh.
but their arms are tensed clear up through their shoulders.
Sure.
And I tell them to relax. All you do is use your wrists.
Uh-huh.
And it does make it much easier to cut that way if you just use your wrist that way.
That was a question that, or there is a question that occurred to me. can anybody do this?
I think most anyone can do it. Someone with bad arthritis in their hands, yes, they have problems.
I see.
But I've also come up with a method to help them with that. That's just a piece of sandpaper on a stick,
Oh, I see.
but that's very rough sandpaper.
Uh-huh.
And between using the heavy sandpaper and the knives, even though you do have problems with your hands, you can normally get some semblance of bird.
I see. Yeah.
Would you like to show some of these other things?
Yes, I wanted to make sure people were able to see it, and I hope that that we can get close enough in so that they can see the detailing.
Now those are western tanagers.
I see.
This is just a rose that I cut one day when we were out camping.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
This-
now, yeah, I see what you mean now about did this come from a chunk of wood?
That was just
or
out of
just out of a,
2x6,
I see.
and it's fur, so it's split real easy.
Uh-huh.
This bird here is my pride and joy, which is what they call a Texas scissor-tailed flycatcher. And these feathers are still made the same way the parakeet tails are made.
Uh-huh.
And I do have some. I've also made a lot of duck decoys, decorative
Yeah.
duck decoys.
This is a favorite when I was looking at them before the program started. I thought this is really a beautiful piece. But I think you indicated that this was walnut.
That is
And,
black walnut.
And it's hard to work with.
It's very, very hard to cut. You try and cut any feathers in,
Uh-huh.
it's very hard cutting.
Yes. Well, I'm sure anybody would want to start out with something that was a little easier to work with. There's another.
Well, now this one was just, well, you can see it has a lot of nail marks.
Uh-huh. A
That
knot,
was just
some
made out of
knots.
Made out of an old piece of wood that I found.
Uh-huh. Number of knots in it, too, here.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, though, and very decorative, you know, if it's on a mantel shelf or something like that. I think it's...
Now this, I made the eyes on this duck,
I see.
which they're just painted onto a nail head.
Oh,
If you note the eyes on this, these are purchased eyes. Which
I see. Yeah.
do much better on certain things being purchased.
Well, I would think the larger the eye, the more need to have something that
Well-
is especially prepared.
True.
Yeah. You were telling me about the eyes on the parakeets, I believe, and how you made those. I thought that was rather interesting too.
On the parakeets,
Yeah.
I put all the feathers on and put the eyes in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all these eyes are is a nail head.
I see.
I've cut a nail off about 1/4 of an inch long and put it into the head. Well, then after the bird is painted, then my wife will paint that nail head black. And if you use a translucent glue, like Elmer's glue, well, Elmer's is what I use,
Uh-huh.
you lay this bird down flat, put just a drop of glue on that nail head. And when it dries, it will be rounded up, translucent to get to the black nail
Black
head,
nail.
which looks like an eye.
Uh-huh.
And you cannot buy eyes that small.
Yeah.
So you have to make them some way.
Uh-huh.
I also make my own feet.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too, because I noticed these, how real they appear to be.
Here they are. Now you can buy, certain places you can buy regular bird feet. They're made out of pewter.
Uh-huh.
And
Cast, huh?
they're cast.
Uh-huh.
These I make out of wire wrapped with thread and glue. And then after they're wrapped and put together, you go down them with a marking pencil to give them black marks here and there. And that makes them look, well, if you look at some of these
I think
feet of the birds.
those look really great. Those are extremely realistic, and they have the little ribs that that you normally see in the bird's feet.
Of course, wrapping them with that thread
Gives you
them
that
a scaly
yeah,
look.
Yeah, right.
And this is not near as hard to do as it looks like it is.
Uh-huh. Well, we talked a little bit about, well, go ahead.
What I was going to say, for anyone that would be interested in carving, this book, Carving Realistic Birds by H.D. Green, which costs $3, whether you order it or whether you buy it at a bookstore.
I see.
It gives a very good, well, it gives bird patterns and so on. It tells about the feet. It tells how to make the feet, although it's not easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a very good book
Uh-huh.
for anyone that is interested in
It's
carving.
well illustrated in just from what I've seen there. The
there's
detail is very good. Yes.
Robin and the three little babies there.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's great.
In fact, this is mainly where I get most of my information for the classes which I teach.
Uh-huh. Now that we're talking about classes, where do you teach them and how often do you teach them?
Well, I've been teaching them about once a year down at the Clark House.
I see.
That's for the Commission on Aging and the Iowa Arts Council.
Arts Council?
Right,
Okay,
which I belong to the Iowa Arts Council for bird carving.
I see. If somebody was interested in this, to take this course, how much cost would they have involved personally?
Well, basically none,
I see.
because the Iowa Arts Council pays for the supplies.
Mm-hmm.
You are supposed to be over 60 to be eligible for the class at the Clark House.
Yes.
Whether that's a drawback or something else, I
Well, we
can't say.
like to think that's a
I think over
plus.
60 is fine.
Yes, I think that's a real plus.
Over 50 would be a little better, but,
Right.
but no, the classes basically, they're free. They do, I guess, request a 50-cent donation,
Uh-huh.
but it's not essential.
Yeah.
And the materials is all supplied. And most of the students which has been in the class have ended up with a bird.
I see.
Whether they look quite like mine is beside the point.
Well, certainly it.
Well, you and me don't look quite alike either.
No, we don't. Thank heavens, huh?
Right.
Then, if they were interested in joining or participating in a class, then they could call the Commission on Aging
Right.
down there and get further information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was going to ask you, are any of these articles that you have here for sale?
Well, to belong to the Iowa Arts Council, you have to be a professional.
Mm-hmm.
And to be a professional, the criterion they use is selling something. I have sold.
Mhm.
Things are not cheap because there is a lot of hours.
So much work.
Now, one of these, we have between 30 and 35 hours invested in one of these. And right or wrong, I put a price of about $120 on one of these parakeets.
I see.
I'll grant you, I haven't sold one for that price.
Yes.
But rather than cut the price, I will give them away.
Well, you probably would have a lot of takers. I would
Well,
suspect a lot of people would be, they'd keep you carving for another 150 years.
I do have some applicants.
Oh, do you? All right. Leroy, I do want to take this opportunity to thank you for being on the program today.
Been my pleasure.
We do appreciate the time and effort that you've given to us. And it's been a pleasure for me to meet you personally and get acquainted with you,
Thank
and in some of our conversations that we've had.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to show my birds. I grant you, I am proud of them. I will grant
Well,
them.
you should be. You should be. They represent a lot of hours and a lot of dedication to
Yes.
this.
As an example of the hours, the peregrine falcon, which I made for my boy, I spent 120 hours on carving
Carving
bird.
that. Yes, and if if you were going to charge, say, $10 an hour, and of course for something like this it'd probably be more, but if that would run the price up pretty steep,
That
wouldn't
runs
it?
it up pretty fast.
Yes, yes, it would.
But I don't quite think you could get $10 an hour out of it. It would be nice.
Yes. I think this concludes our program for today. And since we've thanked you, we really appreciate your efforts.
Thank you much.
It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk.